My family and I moved to Miramontes around 1986, mainly because the earthquake of 85 had severely damaged the building where we lived, and we almost got crushed. Before officially moving into the house, my dad asked me to accompany him one Sunday to see our new home. He eagerly agreed. For an 8-year-old, seeing a new house was quite exciting. When we arrived, he told me he would be back soon as he needed to find out where the store was. He asked him not to leave me alone because, for some reason, the house gave me the creeps, especially the dining room. This place, without any apparent reason, made me feel dizzy. Eventually, my dad left, and I stayed watching TV, though I wasn't really paying attention. He stood by either door, fearing a witch or a ghost might appear, or at least that's what I thought at the time. After a few minutes, I started feeling like someone was watching me. Inside the house, I felt a chill, even though it was sweltering outside. I can't remember much more from that day. We ended up moving into the house, and although it might be hard to believe, a kind of mist seemed to linger inside, though no one mentioned it. Over time, I would wake up at who knows what hour, and I remember my curtain was very thin, so the moonlight shone through clearly. When this happened, I would stare at the ceiling and walls, not responding or thinking about anything. Until one day, I swear I saw a woman passing through my wall. She was wearing a kind of shawl as a dress, and her hair was very long. I watched as she moved from one side to the other. It terrified me since I had never seen anything like it. He ended up curling up and fell asleep, but I didn't tell anyone about it. I don't know how much time passed, but on another occasion, I woke up suddenly. My breathing was rapid, which was unusual for an 8-year-old, and I couldn't tell anyone about it. I tried to calm myself, wanted to scream but couldn't. I attempted to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. So, I started praying, and gradually, everything subsided. Once I could move and calm down a bit, I began to hear a man murmuring in the dining room. It was a deep voice that resonated. I honestly couldn't believe I was hearing it. So, I sat on the edge of my bed and stayed still, holding my breath, thinking that if someone was speaking, I might hear the conversation better. I barely managed to make out the voice of a woman, and it seemed she was drinking. Suddenly, something slammed on the table, and then the most terrifying moment of my life occurred. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and an immense terror engulfed me. I could hear each step on the stairs. I thought it was a dream and that I couldn't be hearing any of it. I prayed to God for mercy, pressed myself against the wall, and continued praying. I swear, I felt someone sit on the edge of my bed and then begin to lie down. I was crying and felt an overwhelming cold, as if I were out in the winter, naked on the street. I could even see my breath, the mist that appears when it's very cold. Tears ran down my face, and I felt the bed dip as if someone was moving closer to me. Not only that, but I swear I could feel someone else's breath in my ear. I don't know if I fainted or what happened, but I woke up the next day, vividly remembering what had occurred. After these events, I slowly began to change. I was already very thin, but it got worse, and I had pronounced dark circles under my eyes. I was afraid to sleep, fearing I would wake up to hear those conversations and the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I remember one occasion when I was sitting on the bed with my mother and asked if I could finish my homework using the calculator. After much pleading, she agreed. I went downstairs and had to practically climb to reach the calculator. Suddenly, the bathroom door opened, and when I turned to look, there he was, the old man I always heard talking or walking at night. He was wearing a hat, and I saw him in profile. My first reaction was to stand there, mouth agape. At that moment, I felt someone tugging at my blouse. When I turned, there was a woman, but I could only see her long hair. She pulled me, causing me to fall to the floor, where I screamed loudly. This made my mother rush down to see what was happening. She asked me what was wrong, but I could barely speak, only babbling about a woman while pointing toward the bathroom. It wasn't the first time I had seen her, she appeared to me frequently in the house. The terrifying part was that it seemed like she was mocking me. My mother and I once had an encounter. He told her to look at a corner because a woman was laughing at us. My mother said she couldn't see her, but deep down, she knew something was wrong in the house, she just didn't want to admit it. One time, my younger brother and I decided to sleep together to ease our fears. We pushed our beds together so we could hug each other if we got scared. One night, we woke up suddenly, not knowing what was happening. We could only hear a sort of noise, and we couldn't figure out what it was. It sounded like several voices and laughter. He asked my brother if he could hear it too, but he was too terrified to respond. His face was frozen in fear. He tried to reassure him, even though I felt the same dread inside. We heard what sounded like glasses clinking, as if people were toasting, and the drawers in the kitchen opening and closing, along with the clattering of cutlery. It was truly an uproar. Suddenly, everything went silent, and we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My brother and I held each other tightly. In the end, we never knew if they ended up lying down with us or not. We remember that night vividly, and it's incredible to think about. Apparently, a kind of ghost lived in our house, but they didn't appear as dark shadows. The final straw was when my mother asked me to turn off the lights downstairs. I asked if she wanted all of them off, given what was happening, as it didn't make sense. But in the end, I had to do it. When I got to the last light by the entrance and stairs, something terrified me. I turned my head toward a wall near the dining room and saw that dreadful woman. Her face was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen, a mix of flesh and decay. Her hair seemed to float, and her dress was black and looked ancient. It was something utterly horrifying and demonic. I screamed like crazy and then climbed the stairs as best as I could. When I saw my mother in the hallway, I almost choked out the words that the lady in black was in the dining room. My mother just kept asking where she was, while my siblings were terrified, and I couldn't even stand up from the fear. One of my brothers went to get holy water, and I gathered the courage to go back downstairs with my mother. She began sprinkling holy water throughout the house while we recited the Lord's Prayer. That night, I ended up dozing off in my parents' room because I couldn't sleep. It was there that my mother told my father what was happening. She recounted that her hair had also been pulled so hard that it was torn out. Occasionally, the lights in the rooms would turn off, and her feet were pulled at night. My siblings had also seen strange things. One of them mentioned that one day, while sitting in the living room, he suddenly saw some little figures form a wheel, like a St. Michael's wheel, and they began to sing and jump while holding hands. My dad asked my mother why she had never told him. He mentioned that at work, a colleague had read his palm and asked if there were ghosts in the house. My father just laughed it off and said no. The woman insisted and told him that there were ghosts in the house and asked if there were two people bothering the family, especially his daughter. She suggested that this might be why they had noticed changes like weight loss, sleep, or appetite issues. In the end, they spoke with her and asked her to come to the house. One Sunday, this woman showed up. She was somewhat peculiar, with a different aura. Her daughter came with her, and I immediately took her by the hand and invited her to play. We went up to my room, and my father asked me if I could see the people in the house, to which I replied yes. At that moment, she shouted to her mother that they were already there. The woman had a censer, candles, and other things, and then she called for me. Her daughter seemed like an angel to me, and she asked me what these people were like and where they were. I told them everything I knew and saw. The woman explained that these people were there because a very strong witchcraft had been done in the house before. Apparently, they were low astral beings, and the previous owner had given them permission to stay there, inhabiting both the bathroom and a corner of the living room. In those places, it always felt like a freezer. The woman asked for me to be taken out of the room because those entities seemed to want to go against me. They appeared to be very upset. My mother and I left, and I don't know how much time passed, but we could only hear them asking for those things to leave the house. It seemed they were confusing me with the previous owner because they kept mentioning her name, something we never told the woman when she came to cleanse the house. When we returned inside, the atmosphere felt different, and little by little, the fog and the incense smoke from the woman and her daughter began to clear. we never heard anything about it again. Even today, there's something in this house that always makes staying here uncomfortable, all because the previous owner, who was a witch, didn't know there was something she wasn't aware of and liked to connect with beings from the lower astral. Remembering all this makes me tremble because I'll never forget that horrifying woman I saw.